Photos of German signposts in World War II have become familiar to military hobbyists of all kinds as a source of amusement and wonder. They've been used to illustrate an array of topics ranging from Teutonic humor to the absurdity of military life. There are similar photos taken on the Allied side of the line, but for some reason, they have not enjoyed the attention German signposts receive. For those who served in the British and Canadian armies in Northwest Europe from D-Day to VE Day, military road signs were a familiar and even comforting part of the landscape. This video will explain why. The 21st Army Group commanded all American, British, and Canadian forces in the sea and air landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944. In August 1944, the U.S. 1st Army and British 2nd Army were joined by the 1st Canadian Army. In September, 2 additional army groups were created in France. At the end of the Battle of Normandy in early September, while the 21st Army Group raced into Belgium and the Netherlands, the Germans refused to give up major ports on the Channel coast. The Allies had thoroughly wrecked the French rail system before D-Day, meaning that Allied supplies had to be driven by truck over great distances all the way from Normandy. For every man at the front, there were 12 more working in the line of communications zone in such units as hospitals, repair shops, salvage depots, laundries, leave centers, print shops, all providing a host of services in support of the fighting echelons. Imagine a soldier fresh from Ontario or Yorkshire being assigned a truck at Bayeux and told to drive to an ordnance depot 500 kilometers away in Brussels, or a dispatch rider given an important message to convey to a distant headquarters. Military road signs were there to show him the way. 21st Army Group fought to the end of the war on the left flank of the Allied armies with 1st Canadian Army and British 2nd Army under command, along with various American and other Allied forces at different times. 21st Army Group Tactical Headquarters moved 27 times during the campaign, coming to rest on the heath at Lüneburg in May 1945, where the famous surrender of German forces took place. One of the soldiers of that victorious army was Lieutenant Kenneth McKenzie, a lawyer from Alberta who enlisted in 1941 and arrived in Europe as a reinforcement officer. When Lieutenant Donald Patton McDaniel of the Calgary Highlanders was killed on December 1st, at the age of 27, McKenzie was sent out to replace him. By coincidence, both men had been born in Calgary, but moved to Edmonton to attend law school at the University of Alberta. Mackenzie's combat career was short. He moved to the Nijmegen salient where the Canadian Army was spending a long, cold, and mostly quiet winter. Mackenzie contracted diphtheria and went to hospital for several months, and when the shooting stopped, the Army gave him a chance to use his education, trying court-martial cases in occupied Europe. During Mackenzie's year-long service in Europe after the war, he possessed 2 things which made this video possible: a camera and an interest in military road signs. He traveled back down the 21st Army Group's line of communications, snapping photos along the way. When his photo album was discovered in the Regimental archives in 2008, he gave permission to turn it into a book. That album is the source of several of the photos you're about to see. The armies and corps that made up the 21st Army Group were reliant on good roads and the use of thousands of trucks and motorized vehicles. Rather than use local highway names, the military laid out routes using the best roads and assigned them easily remembered names. The main supply route for 1st Canadian Army was fittingly dubbed Maple Leaf Route. The moniker was used after the war for a famous series of histories, but the route was well known to all who actually served in 1st Canadian Army. In order to keep traffic flowing, it was divided into one-way lanes, Maple Leaf up, heading toward the front, and Maple Leaf down, heading away. Every division had 10 to 20,000 men and thousands of vehicles. It was vital that clearly marked roads keep traffic flowing, otherwise traffic jams could cause disastrous delays of ammunition, reinforcements, and supplies. Each corps under command of the Army also designated additional routes. The main routes of 2nd Canadian Corps are shown here in a contemporary document, as well as a number of lateral routes connecting them. Naming routes, ensuring they were well marked, and posting military police at intersections were all ways of ensuring traffic moved smoothly. Whenever a soldier was given a driving task, particularly for a convoy, it was standard practice to issue him a route card, a very basic set of directions. Drivers were thus not required to navigate using local road names, but could simply get onto a marked military route and follow the signs to his destination. Just like modern road signage, there were rules to govern the design of military signs, such as this administrative instruction for the 1st Canadian Corps. High contrast color schemes were favored, either black signs with white or yellow lettering, or the reverse with black lettering on white. These combinations provided maximum contrast for visibility. Military signs were usually marked with a formation sign in the top left corner, identifying the organization responsible for whatever was being signified. Every army, corps, and division had its own unique formation sign. Thus, Maple Leaf Route, which was administered by 1st Canadian Army, had that formation's insignia in the upper left corner, a gold maple leaf over the red and black map symbol for an army. Signs belonging to the 2nd Canadian Corps had a maple leaf on a blue diamond, backed by the red and white map symbol for a corps headquarters. Every unit within each formation was also given its own unique insignia according to the type of formation: infantry, armored, airborne, etc. In infantry divisions, red rectangles identified infantry units of the senior brigade, green the middle brigade, and brown the junior brigade. White numbers further designated specific units. In each division, the senior infantry battalion was identified by a white 55 on a red background, the junior battalion of the middle brigade a white 62, etc. All the other branches used rectangles and arm of service colors behind the white identifying numbers. This unit insignia was theoretically identical from division to division, so 55 on red was always the senior infantry battalion, regardless of whether it was 53rd Welsh Division or 1st Canadian. As long as both the formation sign and the unit sign were used together, there was no confusion. A vehicle approaching a traffic control point could be quickly identified by this insignia. If multiple units with different destinations were passing through the same crossroads or town square, a sentry or military policeman could direct them without delay. Formation and unit insignia were used on the corner of signs as a symbol of ownership, such as this one erected by the Perth Regiment in Sneek, Netherlands in June 1945. The Perths affectionately referred to the town as Stratford, after the regiment's home in Ontario. This insignia was also used in isolation, however, as a handy means to pointing the way to the unit's location. Lettering on signs was sometimes done with a stencil, but many were done freehand, and the results corresponded to the skill of the painter. Matching modern TrueType fonts to these signs is impossible. Atop is a 2nd Canadian Corps sign pointing the way to Groningen. The letter G appears twice in the name. Compared to this prisoner of war cage sign from the previous photo, and you find some sign painters made only a very subtle distinction between C and G. The sign below is a 1st Canadian Army London route sign. It was either done with a stencil or possibly done freehand and given the appearance of a stencil. The maple leaf appears to have been crudely applied. Military road signs also included bridge classifications. Every military vehicle was assigned a weight class, represented by a numeral painted on a disc somewhere on the front. Every bridge on the military routes were assigned a class indicating the weight it could safely bear. This bridge has been partially washed out by flooding, but the photo shows clearly the classification discs on both the Bailey Bridge and the fender of the truck. Military instructions published the official vehicle weight classes. Motorcycles and jeeps were assigned Class 1, the Universal Carrier was Class 4, an armored truck Class 5, Sherman tanks were Class 33, and so on. This sign shows that trucks exceeding weight Class 40, such as a loaded tank transporter, had to take a different route appropriate to its weight. A collapsed bridge was obviously an impediment to an advance as much as a traffic jam would be. Major urban centers behind the front became home to hundreds of rear area units, salvage depots, supply depots, leaf centers, ordnance workshops, reinforcement holding units, etc. This photo taken in the Belgian port city of Ghent shows signs for numbered routes 200 and 315 and a directory of units on those routes. Naval forces administered the port. Army units included a detail issue depot, general hospital, petrol depots, the 51st Transport Column of the Royal Army Service Corps, the 50th Field Butchery, which prepared meat, Canadian dental units, including a dental company, dental lab, and field dental center, a Deputy Assistant Director of Ordnance Services dump, workshops of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, and a field post office, among others. Ports and base areas were busy places, and working military units were joined by auxiliary services such as the Canadian Legion, the Young Men's Christian Association, or YMCA, Salvation Army, and Knights of Columbus, or British organizations such as ENSA, the Entertainment National Service Association, and NAFI, the Navy Army Air Force Institutes. These organizations all cared for the welfare of the soldiers and established cinemas, reading rooms, sports facilities, and other amenities to the troops. Discipline and desire for harmonious relations with local civilians usually prompted a visible military police presence. Signs were often posted as a preventative measure, reminding troops to be on their best behavior. This sign was posted in Dieppe after its liberation in September 1944 by the 2nd Canadian Division, which had famously suffered heavily in the raid on the city 2 years earlier. A multitude of signs reminded soldiers of all the things they were not supposed to do. For those that didn't heed the warnings, there were plenty of signs advertising the military justice system. Some signs were gentle reminders. On closer inspection, these are two different signs with the same message. Other signs were unsubtle advertisements for victory bonds, loans by citizens to the government to pay for the war. The border between the Netherlands and Germany ran parallel to the route of advance north, and troops might cross over between the two countries without realizing it. The army expected Dutch civilians to be treated with warmth and respect, while reminding soldiers that German civilians were officially the enemy and to be regarded with suspicion, with a ban on fraternization. Other warnings were more stark, constant reminders of the dangers of the combat zone. Or of hazards in places that otherwise might be considered safe. The Germans spent 4 years building up their Atlantic Wall on French, Belgian, and Dutch beaches. Civilians and soldiers alike were eager to return to recreational activities after the war passed by, and signs warned of the dangers. McKenzie, by now a captain, felt these hazards were worth a photo or two. Some signs were installed specifically for their value as photographic subjects. The 1939 song about hanging the washing on the Siegfried Line prompted a number of responses in 1945.
We all hang on the washing on the Siegfried Line, if you're hanging on the washing on the Siegfried.
While civilian road signs were occasionally pulled down or altered by the Germans, they are still prominent in wartime photos. Napoleon usually gets credit for creating the modern French highway system in 1811. By the Second World War, the highways were known as routes nationales and identified by an N prefix. First-class routes were named N1 to N14. The N13 began at Paris, as all first-class routes do, and ran to Cherbourg via Caen. Second- and third-class routes received higher numbers. Electrical illumination and reflective signs were not common in the 1940s, and many signs and signposts were colored white for that reason. The Royal Dutch Touring Club established a number of signposts before the war, bearing this unique winged wheel, which are often seen in wartime photos, and some of which have survived today. The logo of the Royal Dutch Touring Club can be seen on this road sign in Arnhem. European road signs used metric units of distance, while the British, Canadians, and Americans all used the imperial system of miles and yards. Visible here are a white painted traffic island and Dutch road sign with winged wheel, and a Canadian military sign for Blue Route added. This military gas station is made a little more like home by the name signpost and branded advertising, praising S&T service. Herbie was a popular cartoon character appearing in the Canadian Army's newspaper, unsurprisingly called the Maple Leaf. Herbie was a lovable loser, but he survived the war and continued his adventures on Civvy Street in typical Canadian style. Gasoline was a preoccupation for the Allies in Europe. Soldiers were reminded not to discard their empty 5-gallon gasoline containers, named jerry cans, since the pattern was a direct copy of German 20-liter fuel cans. Civilians were forced to ration gasoline and many other goods. This sign may be a humorous take on the public information campaigns asking the people back home to conserve. Army sign painters weren't above expressing their sense of humor, such as advertising the merits of the holiday season in the Nijmegen salient. As the war came to an end, there were signs like this one, crudely drawn and crudely mounted. The soldier at right is using the bayonet as a hammer. By the time British and Russian soldiers met in northern Germany, Hitler was dead, and David Lowe could nicely sum up the war in Italy and northwest Europe in 3 words: all sewn up. More signs followed, this time of gratitude, from the Dutch, who suffered cruelly under German occupation, and from the commander of 1st Canadian Army, as the efficient fighting machine he had molded was broken up and sent home. Some stayed in Europe with the occupation forces. Some may have wondered who the next enemy might be. With the military campaign over, McKenzie turned his camera to some other signs of war as he came back through Europe before going home to Canada. Blown buildings and bridges. There would be months and years of cleaning up and rebuilding, and here and there slit trenches and concrete bunkers still serve in the 21st century as reminders of mankind's bloodiest war. What has not survived are the signs. Never intended to be permanent monuments, most were probably torn down as the armies moved on. Made of wood, any survivors not preserved in museums very likely rotted away. This one lasted long enough for Ken McKenzie to get a picture showing the effects of weather and passing vehicles. There were destroyed tanks, many to remain in place for years before they could be removed, and the remains of their crews. Lance Corporal Thomas Howarth was 25 when he was killed in action on 26 October 1944. His crewmate, Trooper Henry Charles Palmer, was 27. Having served together in the close confines of a Sherman tank, they now lie at rest in adjacent plots of Bergen-op-Zoom Cemetery. Signs went up also at places like the Herzogenbusch concentration camp at Fürth. It was in ruins when Ken McKenzie visited after its liberation by British and Canadian troops. Nearly 750 of its 31,000 inmates had died there. While it was not an extermination camp, it was part of the apparatus of the Holocaust, a transit camp through which Jews and others were sent to death camps in Germany and occupied Poland for execution. British military photographers recorded these images. Prisoners were kept inside with electrified barbed wire, spikes, and broken glass. This crematorium of and disposed of human bodies. McKenzie, possibly unaware of its purpose, posed for this photo. His original caption notes only that those who dismantled the camp had not yet destroyed it. The sign painters were also at the larger camps like Bergen-Belsen. Not officially an extermination camp, it nonetheless had 13,000 unburied corpses when the British Army arrived. Belsen was turned into a symbol of Nazi oppression, and these signs were not only for posterity, but to educate the local population that swore ignorance of the camp's activities. Before he left Europe, Ken McKenzie's camera captured a hint of what an enormous logistical undertaking the invasion of Europe had been. Thousands of signs had gone up as the armies advanced from Normandy to the North German plain. McKenzie's lens recorded only a handful of these signs, the barest glimpse of what tens of thousands of British and Canadian soldiers had done during the war. Among these testaments to their labors was a sign hinting at the most precious goal McKenzie shared with the hundreds of thousands of his countrymen that had served overseas during the war: Canadian repatriation. McKenzie returned to Canada in February 1946, reuniting with his wife of nearly 4 years, Doris. Less than a month later, he was working with the Crown Prosecutor's Office in Edmonton. In a brief telephone conversation with me at the time the album was discovered, he admitted that he had turned down an offer to work for the Alberta Attorney General, as he was determined to be his own boss. It took longer than he wanted. He shortly left the prosecutor's office to start his own practice, then spent 4 years in the same Attorney General's position he originally turned down, before partnering with an old law school friend. Ted Bishop and Kenneth McKenzie became Queen's Counsels in the mid-1950s, and the firm prospered. McKenzie retired in 1984 and passed away in 2014, just 2 weeks shy of his 97th birthday. His wife Doris had passed away the previous year. They had been married 71 years.
Mother dear, I'm writing you from somewhere in France, hoping this finds you well. Sergeant says I'm doing fine, a soldier and a half. Here's the song that we all sing, it'll make you laugh. We're gonna hang out the washing on the Siegfried line. Have you any dirty washing, mother dear? We're gonna hang out the washing on the Siegfried line, 'cause the washing day is here. Whether the weather may be wet or fine, we'll just rub along without a care. We're gonna hang out the washing on the Siegfried line, if the Siegfried line's still there.